I'm here at the University of Minnesota exploring the soul of Western civilization. The DNA of the Western civilization was written in the universities and monasteries in Europe. Now, the universities have rejected the ideas that created the modern West. Therefore, in a series of lectures, I'm exploring if the sun must now set on the West. A few decades ago, American women launched a social movement called Women's Lib, a movement for liberating women. One would have expected women in Afghanistan who were being governed under the repressive regime of Taliban to launch a movement for Women's Lib. Why didn't they launch such a movement? Why was it launched in America? Was it because the American women were more oppressed than women in Muslim cultures and societies? Well, obviously not. You would agree that the reason is that for a body to fight germs or disease, the body has to have certain strength. It has to have some stamina to be able to fight disease, germs, or whatever is bothering it. A weak, anemic body is incapable of fighting. American women launched the Women's Lib movement because something had empowered them. It had given them the strength to stand up for justice, to stand up for their dignity and honor. Everyone will agree that there was discrimination against women. There weren't equal wages for equal work, for example. So there were legitimate reasons for that protest, but the American women had the strength to launch that protest. The question is, what had empowered the women? And I will be suggesting today that during the last 500 years, the Western understanding of gender relationship, marriage, family life was shaped by Martin Luther's teaching. Even if you weren't a Lutheran, even if you weren't a Protestant, if you weren't a Christian, but if you were participating in the culture shaped by biblical reformation, your understanding of what marriage is or ought to be was shaped by Martin Luther. His home in Wittenberg was the first Christian vicarage or Protestant vicarage, except that before his time, priests didn't marry, so there was no Christian pastor's home or vicarage. His home was the first Christian vicarage, and his writings and his teaching shaped the understanding of the entire Western civilization, what marriage is. And it was a unique and peculiar understanding. That is now being undermined and discarded, and in fact, in a university such as University of Minnesota, my guess is that Luther's point of view is a minority point of view. It has already been decisively rejected. For 50 years or so, Hugh Hefner's idea from Playboy Mansion and Playboy magazine has been shaping the understanding of what marriage or relationship of genders is or should be or ought to be. Now, he doesn't finance Playboy Mansion. American society does. The people who buy his magazine and who patronize all the paraphernalia that comes from the Playboy enterprise, it is average American who is financing, and not everybody and not necessarily majority, but essentially it is the culture which is financing it, even if all that it is getting is vicarious pleasure and problems. Martin Luther stands for monogamy, marriage understood as one man, one woman, lifetime relationship. And Hugh Hefner stands for serial polygamy, not just polygamy, but serial polygamy, several women at one time for short time, and then another group of women, etc. Now that is fun, that is pleasure, that is ideal, even if you are not able to realize that ideal in your own life. You might be too scared of your wife or girlfriend to actually experience what he does. But you envy him. He is the most envied bachelor. The question is, does what Hugh Hefner stands for, does it really liberate and empower women? We've already suggested that Luther's teachings empowered women in Western civilization and made them stronger than any other women on the planet, empowered them enough to take the battle further for their liberation and their justice and their honor and their sense of equality. But will the new trend actually liberate and empower and strengthen? That's what, or will it destroy? That's the question that we are exploring today. Perhaps I should begin by saying that I got seriously interested in the subject in 1987 when an 18-year-old widow, she had just been married and became a widow, she was burnt on her husband's funeral pyre in a religious tradition called sati, or widow burning, in India. One evening I was walking with my family to have some Indian ice cream from a vegetarian restaurant, and we ran into a German follower of Hare Krishna. And as I began talking with him, I said that, I appreciate the fact that you're coming from Hitler's Germany and vegetarianism and a land of nonviolence, and the spirituality associated with those things would probably appeal to you. I was shocked that he began a passionate defense of Adolf Hitler. Now, Hitler was also vegetarian, so at that time I didn't know that. While he began to defend Hitler, I then asked him what he thought of widow burning, because on that very morning, on one of the back pages of the newspapers, there was a very small story of this 18-year-old young woman having committed sati in Rajasthan, west of us in Delhi. So I thought, what do you think of that? And he began another passionate defense of widow burning, a religious institution that denies individuality to women most fundamentally, that once your husband is dead, you have no value, no purpose, you might as well die. A woman exists only for her husband. So once he began so outspoken vocal defense of widow burning, I began to suspect that this little news item had more to it than what I had assumed reading the newspaper. The newspaper was run by a secular liberal press, and they thought that this was a silly little thing happening. But this young man from Germany living in New Delhi, India, he couldn't possibly defend this so strongly unless he was part of a Hindu community in New Delhi which believed what he's saying. So he had enough cultural communal support to take this unapologetic, unashamed position. So next day I began calling all the women's organization in Delhi that, hey, this big ceremony is going to be held to deify, make this woman a goddess, that you guys should send someone to find out what really is happening. And if there is this revival of this tradition of widow burning, then you should do something about it. None of the women group were interested. So I decided to go myself and I wrote the story, which was front page news in the largest newspaper chain in India, and triggered off a national debate for 3 weeks. That was a front page story. Once we started fighting, we were, I think, maximum manpower that we were able to mobilize was 400 people for an event to protest this. But on the other side, those who were supporting it, they had 200,000 people who were supporting widow burning. So I realized how difficult this cultural battle was, and then I wanted to explore how the British had succeeded in banning this tradition in 1829 and why militant Hindus were trying to revive it. So that began my interest in exploring the position of women in India, and I found out that it was only in 1868 and 1870s that first time in history a social reform movement began to ask Indian government, at that time the British were ruling India, to make monogamy the rule or the law for the Hindu community in India. Keshav Chandra Sen, who was the leader of the Brahmo Samaj, a movement started by a Hindu social reformer, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he was the one who was championing monogamy. Until that point, Hinduism practiced polygamy, and in some ways it was much worse than Islamic polygamy. One of the stories was that one high caste aristocratic Brahmin had 100 wives. Some of them were 9, 10, 12-year-old. When he died, these women fled to their home, parents' home and relatives' home to try and save themselves. But his funeral pyre was kept burning for a whole week so that they could find these widows and burn them on the pyre to honor this man. So this was before the missionary movement got going against this whole tradition of widow burning. And then finally, it took almost 70, 80 years of battle before sufficient momentum was generated that Keshav Chandra Sen could ask that polygamy should be banned and India should have monogamy. And his reason was that if India has to develop and catch up with the West, we need strong women, we need strong children, we need strong family, and monogamy is a social institution which empowers the women. Now, the reason he was arguing was that 30 years or so, 30, 40 years before his time, Alexis de Tocqueville, the French magistrate, had visited America in 1831-32. Tocqueville was a young French magistrate. This is 40 years after the French Revolution, which had failed, 50 years after the American Revolution, which had succeeded. He came to America to study the American penal system and extended his stay for 2 more years to study democracy in America, and then he published his classic 2-volume study called Democracy in America. At the end of the 2nd volume, Tocqueville says that in these 2 volumes I have discussed a number of positive things about America. If you ask me, he's saying to his Roman Catholic readers in France, if you ask me, what is the chief cause of the extraordinary prosperity and the growing power of America, then the answer is, it is because of the superiority of their women. In other words, he's saying to Europeans that America is greatest because American women are greater than European women. Why? Genetically, they are the same, but he traces it to the Protestant teaching and to democracy, the freedom both in religious sphere and in the area of politics socio-political democracy, freedom, and religious freedom, they have made American women superior to European women. Now, France is still a Roman Catholic country at that point. And what explains this difference that French women didn't become like American women? And the difference is obviously Martin Luther, the Reformation that he began in 1517, when he nailed the 95 Theses on the Castle Church of Wittenberg. The primary point in 1517 was the selling of indulgences. Are we justified? Are we saved? Do we find salvation by purchasing indulgences or forgiveness? You pay X amount of money and you get your sins remitted. You don't have to spend time in purgatory. You can go to heaven earlier if you pay so much money, not only for yourselves, but also for your deceased relatives and parents. You can purchase their salvation. So he was protesting against that. But for the first 6 years, the reform movement was perceived by the masses as a theological dispute amongst the experts. Does the Bible teach this or teach that? It didn't really touch ordinary people, ordinary laymen. But people began to see that something strange was happening when, as a result of Luther's writings, priests began to get married. Then everybody started talking about the Reformation. That's when it became a mass movement. Now, the priests started getting married because once Luther was condemned as a heretic in 1522, he hid in the castle of Wartburg, translating the New Testament into German language, from Latin and Greek into German. And as he is studying the Bible, he's hiding, he's grown his beard, and he's pretending to be a knight, etc., so nobody knows this is Martin Luther. And he's translating the Bible, so he has plenty of time to study the Bible. And one of the things he begins to realize, that the whole medieval attitude to sex and marriage and gender has been wrong. Once the cult of Virgin Mary, and he called it a cult because there was no biblical basis for praying to Mary, etc. Once the cult of Virgin Mary got going, then virginity was exalted in culture. Marriage and sex were sinful and evil. This was, so if you wanted to be holy, if you wanted to know God, serve God as a priest or a monk, you refrained from marriage, you took vow of celibacy. This was the medieval attitude. But Luther found that, as he's reading the Bible, that no, God created man in his image, male and female, as sexual beings before sin entered the world. Marriage was instituted by God himself when he brought Eve to Adam. So marriage and sex had nothing to do with sin. This was part of the beautiful creation that God himself said was good, was very good. So marriage was good. This began to change him. He wrote his book, The Babylonian Captivity, which argued the case that this practice of enforced celibacy and seeing celibacy as somehow holier was wrong. He followed it up with a letter to the nobility in which he pointed out pragmatic reasons why there is so much sexual immorality amongst the priests, and in order to prevent that sexual immorality, we should allow priests to marry. Because Jesus himself said that some people are born to be celibate, some people choose celibacy for the sake of the kingdom of God, and some people are forced into that. So it's the forced part which is what Luther was fighting against. Now, as a result, these three priests got married, and the Archbishop Albert of Mainz, he arrested these three priests for getting married and put them in prison. So Luther wrote a very strong letter of protest, which was published. So the bishop, in order to defend his action, handed over the case to the University of Wittenberg to settle whether Luther is right or the church's, Roman Catholic Church's teachings are right. The university asked a senior scholar, Karlstadt, to give his opinion on this issue. So Karlstadt studied what exactly does the Bible teach, is Luther right or is the church right, and argued that what Luther is saying is really what the Bible teaches. The church has been wrong all along. Karlstadt not only argued that marriage was right and good, was an option, he actually went on to say that it is an obligation. Celibacy is wrong, matrimony is an obligation. One shouldn't even be a priest unless he's a father and can manage his household properly, learns to manage his children, etc. So Luther, of course, was delighted to have an academic support from a senior scholar to his position, but he wasn't comfortable with the fact that Karlstadt had said not only priests should marry, but monks should marry. Luther had said that monks should not marry because he was himself an Augustinian monk. He said, we have taken voluntary vows of celibacy, therefore we should remain celibate. But that raised the question that are these vows of celibacy biblical, or are these doctrines of demons, as 1 Timothy 4 suggests? So he then went back to the Bible and started studying the Bible afresh. That's when he discovered the whole notion of a priesthood of all believers, that those who are married and serving as carpenters or woodcutters or cobblers or teachers or whatever, their profession, their calling is as holy as the calling of the priests. A calling of the housewife is as precious as the calling of a priest, and therefore there is no distinction, and these vows of celibacy are wrong, and therefore they should not be binding. Now, as a result of that discovery in his new book, it began to empty out monasteries and nunneries. His wife, Katie, she, along with 9 other nuns, escaped a nunnery in empty barrels. So one of Luther's friends was supplying beer in these beer barrels. So as he was taking these empty barrels, he had 10 of these nuns into that, and they escaped. And 9 of them got husbands. Katie didn't get a husband, and she said, I'm not going to marry anyone except Dr. Luther. So a lot of pressure was put upon him, and he finally married. And that, of course, began a whole new line of attack on him, because already fierce controversy and conflict was going on. And now the attack was that, oh, this explains the Reformation. He wanted to satisfy his carnal lusts and get married and have sex, and that's why all of this fuss, theological rationalizations. And he responded by saying to the Roman Catholic priests and monks at that time, you fellows, you don't understand a thing. 1 year of marriage is more sanctifying than 10 years in a monastery. Only those who are married understand what he's saying. Because Luther says, you know, our culture was opposed to marriage. The priests didn't want to marry. Why? Because who wants a nagging wife? You know, who wants the disobedient children? If you're single and you're a priest, you can afford to sleep in bed until the sun is nice and warm overhead. You know, and why do you want to have to get up to feed the kids and change the kids and dress them up, etc., and make money to sustain all of this responsibility? Buddha was against marriage. Buddha renounced his own wife and child because he saw attachment as the source of suffering. So in order to find enlightenment, you have to detach yourself from all commitments. And therefore, Buddhist monks and priests, they were always single. A priest should be free from all of this responsibility. But no, these are the responsibilities that we have to take. We have to assume that is what it means to be men. Boys need to grow up into manhood to assume responsibility for women, assume responsibility for children, assume responsibility for making money, saving money, sacrificing their own interests for the sake of others. This is what it means for boys to grow up into manhood. Now, it's possible to have social monogamy, sexual polygamy, so man has mistresses. Wife, then, she might tolerate because many of our family lives depend on force. The wife would be beaten, a wife would be punished in many different ways. So she's forced to tolerate your lifestyle, but she does run the home and get the husband in the home, and that does help. So polygamy is better than what Hugh Hefner has, which is what I'm calling sexual polygamy, but not even social polygamy. There is no obligation, there is no commitment, there is no security, there is no stability for those women. They are only playmates, playthings. And this is far more dehumanizing. That when you're down, when you're discouraged, when you're not interested in sex, you're not loved, you're not cared for, you're not ministered to. If you're depressed, we don't want you there, we'd rather have someone else there. Family, even if it is a polygamous family, where there is stability of commitment and society ensures that there is commitment, that's a much better situation. The impact of family on economy is obviously that weakening of marriages and family life in America and Europe means that Asian children are doing better in schools because their family is involved. You know, the mother gets the father involved with the children. The father would rather be playing with his friends golf or football or cards or drinking or whatever, but the mother would draw the husband. She's committed to the child, and she will draw the husband. So I get that lecture all the time that you haven't written to your daughter and you haven't talked to your daughter. My wife will dial the telephone to India. She talks to our daughter in India every day, sometimes twice a day. She calls India, and then she dials the phone, gives me the phone. Monogamy becomes very important for education of children, because it requires a commitment which men normally don't have, and mothers have to keep reminding the fathers to get involved. Daily nurture of children, but then mothers can't do it by themselves. They need the authority of the father in most cases to have the discipline, so the children will in fact obey and listen to their mother. So an education means strong children. The monogamy also means that fathers are parents are making sacrifices, saving for their children. It's parents and grandparents' connections that help children in their jobs, in their so that children are learning from parents and uncles and aunts and grandparents, which doesn't happen if the father has had several relationships, mothers has had several relationships. Then children don't have the time to have uncles and aunts and grandparents. Family structure is broken, so the children then are deprived of all the learning and all the connections that they can benefit from in terms of their economic future. And grandparents have no relationship with their grandchildren, so they have no reason really to save and make the resources available to their grandchildren. So family is a very absolutely important unit for the economic development. And as you can tell from the title, what I'm suggesting is now the opposite is happening. The culture is turning men into boys who will not take responsibility for women, not take responsibility for children, not take responsibility for the world, for economy, for nation, who want to play around, fool around with women, and in the end, what is supposed to be play hurts everyone, as we would see in a few minutes from Hugh Hefner himself. So Luther then, because of this whole conflict, he comes under a lot of fire and he has to defend himself. Now, as a result of his teaching, monasteries are empty. So Frederick of Saxony, the Duke of Wittenberg, he gave him the monastery because all the monks have left. So he and Katie had now a huge home, and Katie turned it into a hostel where she began to have students from Wittenberg live with them. She would feed them, they would pay her a rent, that became her job. And then after dinner, Luther would be having his mug of beer, and these students will be raising a lot of questions, and he would be giving answers, and some of those question and answers are quite crude. As you read his stuff, they weren't very polite and gracious and politically correct in those days. Those were days of war and ideas. So some of those discussions are actually, from our standard, quite crude. But his students were taking notes, and that became table talks. Some of those notes were edited and published as table talks. And it was those discussions, because this is the first time now a Bible scholar has become a married man, a family man, who is explaining to these students what marriage is, what sex is, what gender is, and he has no models to follow except go back to the Bible to try and define. And that then becomes the view of marriage and family in the whole of the Western culture. That one God, triune God, created man in his image, male and female. Only one Eve was created for one Adam, and the two of them were supposed to be one flesh, and they were blessed, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. So two of you need to become three. This is God's desire, this is God's blessing. Children are a blessing, they are a responsibility, yes, but that's what it means to be a man, to take that responsibility. Fill the earth. Turn the whole earth into a garden for your children. Now, if you're living for yourself, you can live on a tree house. You don't have a motivation to build a house if you don't have grandchildren. When you have grandchildren, great-grandchildren, then you're building for 100 years. You're saving for 100 years. But otherwise, as a single person, you can live in a cave or you can live on a tree house. So the family becomes the driving force for development of civilization. At one of the most fundamental levels, Martin Luther and Hugh Hefner share the same idea that sex is good, body is good, it is something God wants us to enjoy. But whether there are boundaries for enjoyment, is there a point where pleasure can actually lead to pain and become destructive instead of building civilization, destroying civilization? Now, last week we were looking at Freud and particularly one area of Freud, how he built on Darwinian view of emotions to reduce all emotions to the level of material factors, instincts, hormones, DNA, genes, chemical changes. Love is no longer a fruit of the spirit. There is no such thing as fruit of the spirit because man is not a spiritual being. You are only body, so all emotions are only bodily. And therefore, there is no distinction between works of the flesh, anger and frustration and jealousy and hatred and love. The two become one. Everything is emotion. Everything has come from our millions of years of evolution. It's part of our genes, part of our DNA. There is no reason to say one kind of emotion is wrong. Jealousy, hatred, anger is wrong. Love, joy, peace is good. There is no way of making these distinctions. Now, based on what Darwin had written in his 1872 book, The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals, on which William James built his theory of what is an emotion, on which then Freud went on to build his psychoanalysis, Kinsey report came out looking at sexuality through research which has been faulted by a number of experts. And that became the norm for a naturalistic or materialistic understanding of how genders should relate. So, X percentage of people cheat, which shows that monogamy is not normal. Well, there was some biological explanation that male is polygamous by nature, female is monogamous. Well, female has only one egg a month, male is producing a lot of sperm. He is polygamous physiologically or biologically. That's what he is, and in fact, that is what we see in practice. So, what is and what ought to be, the distinction between those two is blurred, because once you begin to look at natural phenomena, statistics, this is what it is. For example, if you're living in a tribal situation where to be a man means to kill your family enemies or to kill someone from the other tribe if you can find it, or kidnap a woman from the other tribe and rape her. This is what everybody does. Most people feel like killing someone at least once or twice in their lifetime. So because we want to kill, or we want to covet, or we want to lie, we do deceive, this is what we are, this is normal, this is natural. Yeah. Should it then be legalized? Because everybody wants to murder, therefore should murder be legal? Because everybody wants to commit adultery, everybody wants to sleep with his neighbor's wife. This is what we are. Yes, but in fact, all morality is an attempt to restrain what we want to do. We want to covet, we want to kill, we want to hurt, we want to commit adultery, but thou shalt not. That's what it means to be moral. That you don't give unto your nature because you live by a higher law. You subject the flesh, the matter, to the spirit. You want to hurt, but you actually ought to forgive. Now, this is where Hugh Hefner's personal journey really began. He was studying in Chicago, studying psychology. At that time, Freud was in vogue, and Kinsey report had just come out on male sexuality. He was working on that, and his girlfriend was Mildred Williams. He married her. But just before their marriage, she confessed that she already had an affair and she was not a virgin. He said that that was the most devastating news for him. He was shattered. Now, she felt guilty, and so to make up for what she had done, she permitted him to cheat on her. That way, we're even. Now, that was a very secular, materialistic sense of justice. An alternative would have been to forgive. Yes, I've cheated. I repent, forgive, and we help each other never to do that again. But that was a Christian worldview which didn't fit into the whole development from Darwin to Freud and McKinsey. The idea of justice was, if you have done this, then I should do that. Now, he realizes the reality of jealousy. Jealousy is real. She has permitted, but that doesn't mean that she is not going to be jealous and envious of other women. So the marriage falls apart. They lived together for 10 years, but it fell apart. They had 2 children. Then he was married again, had 2 more children, and then to hell with marriage and sham and the social institution. We are animals, let's just live like animals. So the whole idea of freedom creates this problem that what do you do with jealousy? What do you do with envy? There is no way of saying that these emotions are wrong. And there is no way of handling them unless you find spiritual resources to forgive, to love, and to seek help and grace in being renewed, being transformed. So instead of returning to the spiritual tradition, which really comes from Luther and before him, obviously, the Bible, the arguments began to be mustered up. Monogamy is monotony. It is not natural. We are animals. We are by nature polygamous. That's how all our evolutionary cousins live. So that's how we should live. Well, it is true that monogamy is not a natural state of affairs in human relationships. It is a minority point of view. It is not a Jewish idea. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, none of them had one wife. David, Solomon. Monogamy is not a Jewish idea. It's not a Muslim idea. Prophet Muhammad had 13 wives and concubines and sex slaves. Some would say he had only 11, but 11 or 13 is not that different. It's not a Hindu idea. Almost 80% of people living in polygamous culture where polygamy is allowed legally, they in fact have only one wife. So in most Muslim countries, the majority of the families would be one man, one woman, partly because there aren't that many extra women, and also because you have to have money, house, etc. to have, and most people would say that having one wife is difficult enough. Why do you want to have more of the problem? So you can have prostitutes. You don't have to have a second wife. You can have mistresses who don't live in your house. So you have social monogamy, but not sexual monogamy in polygamous culture. So you have only one legal wife. So you have social monogamy, but you don't have sexual monogamy, that you're faithful to only one person for all of your life. Monogamy is not even a secular idea. the secular icons, Plato, Marx, Freud, none of them believed in monogamy. Plato recommended that the philosopher kings shouldn't be burdened with marriage. Wives should be held in common. Stories, legends, myths should be communicated to them. Sexual rituals should be organized for the sake of procreation, so the best male and best female mate, etc., which became the foundation for all the temple prostitution. So when Paul is going out and preaching, some of those cities have temples with 1,000 prostitutes at a time. As Paul is traveling through Europe, Ephesus, Corinth, Philippi, etc., etc., who is following him? It's in every place women who flock to him. And these are women from a sexually permissive culture. So it's interesting that today's feminism hates Paul as enslaving women, but it is women who are following him because they find in his message a possibility of their emancipation. It's the women then who really win the Roman Empire for Christ, to destroy that playboy culture and to restore their own dignity. Female feticide, temple prostitution, plight of the widows. Rodney Stark, in his book on the rise of Christianity, he has a whole section on the positive things that happened in terms of emancipation of women through the Roman Catholic Church, and that is absolutely right. That was the playboy culture which was given religious shape, which has now happened in America. There are more goddesses in America than in India probably right now. You just need to go on the internet to find a goddess, and you don't have to have one goddess. You can hire two goddesses at a time who will serve you. Paganism is back in a big way. So it is true that monogamy is a peculiarly New Testament idea, although it is rooted in the Old Testament, that God had created one Eve for one Adam, for the two of them to be one flesh, who is not to be separated. The divorce is something that God allowed in the Old Testament, but he says in the Old Testament that he hates divorce. This is not what he desires, although because of the hardness of their hearts, he allowed it through Moses. So this is a New Testament idea, and it spread throughout the world only in the 19th century, along with the Western missionary movement. As I was saying, that Keshav Chandra Sen in 1868 or so begins to see that if India has to catch up with the West, we have to empower our women. And the way to empower our women is to have monogamy. Now, he doesn't succeed. In 1949, just 50, 60 years ago, our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he wanted to bring monogamy, make it a law for the Hindus through our constitution, and he didn't succeed. Only in 1956, when Hindu Marriage Act was broken into 6 parts, then monogamy was made law for Hindus in India. It always was the law for Christians, but even today it's not a law for Muslims. So although in 56 it became the law, but even in 1990s, we had a member of parliament who had 49 wives, and he didn't know all their names. How could he? He lives a busy public life, only sees them once in a while at nights, so he doesn't know their names. Now that's what lowers and weakens position of women. monogamy has been attacked and condemned as slavery. And Luther would agree that it is slavery, except that he would say it is slavery for men as much as it is for women. You know, it is a problem that your wife is fighting with you, you hate her, but you can't have a mistress. You can't take a second wife. You can't divorce her. You can't even hate her because the Bible says, husband, love your wives. So even though you feel like hating her, but if you're really going to love God and obey Him, then you have to go to her and you have to go with a bunch of flowers. And you have to say, I'm sorry. And she says, I don't believe you because last year also you said the same thing. Monogamy makes it possible for her to refuse to take any nonsense from you, to fight for her dignity, to bring you to your knees that, okay, if you're going to love God, if you're going to obey Him, you have to get right with her. So you not only have to learn to forgive, you have to learn to repent and find forgiveness and learn to change. She can dictate the changes that she wants. That's what empowered the women in America. By becoming meek, as a husband, as a man, am I becoming weak? Is meekness weakness? Or am I becoming a better person? And therefore a stronger person. I not only have my own strength, but I now have her strength and her children and grandchildren's strength with me. Men become better men. That's what Jesus says, that meek shall inherit the earth. How do we really get power? How do we really become men? Ultimately, it is through meekness and humility that we become better and stronger people who can persevere through difficult times, through sickness, through hard times when we find that we simply do not have the ability to love this person. And we cannot love without God's grace, without the Holy Spirit. Then love is not instincts. Love is not chemistry. Love is fruit of the Spirit. We have to ask God to give us love. We have to ask God's help to change us. So monogamy is not natural, is not normal, it is not easy, and contemporary America is telling us that monogamy is very hard to sustain. It cannot be sustained. It is a peculiarly New Testament idea, and it can only be sustained with the help of New Testament spirituality. If you reject that spirituality, you cannot sustain it. From 1979, United Nations is trying to promote monogamy, and 180 countries have now signed, but it is doing it indirectly because obviously with all the Muslim countries you can't say polygamy should be made illegal, but monogamy is encouraged. Only since 2005, the African nations have agreed to encourage monogamy as a means of equality. The argument they're using is that polygamy means a man can have many women, but a woman cannot have many men. Therefore, polygamy is unequal. If a woman was also able to have many husbands, then polygamy and polyandry should both be practiced as they were in India, and Draupadi had 5 husbands. But since polyandry is not practiced, polygamy is unequal, and we want to promote equality. My question is to the evolutionists, materialists, naturalists, secularists, Why do you believe in equality of male and female? As a matter of pragmatic expediency, many cultures have practiced monogamy, but as a matter of principle, it's a peculiarly New Testament principle. You reject the biblical worldview, reject the New Testament worldview, but the idea of equality in male and female comes from the same worldview. If you reject that worldview and make a statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women have evolved equal. That statement makes no sense, because by definition, evolution is explanation of inequality. Why are species unequal? Evolution is an explanation of inequality. Why are men and women equal? There is no ground for believing and affirming inequality of human beings, except that both were created in God's image and they share the likeness of God. So even though they are biologically different, intellectually there might be differences, economically, physically there might be differences, there is a moral equality which is equality before God, equality before law, etc., which is desirable. So in rejecting the biblical worldview, equality, the notion of equality has also got to be rejected, will be rejected. And for West to demand that other cultures, Muslim culture, Hindu culture, should treat men and women equal is Western imperialism. West is imposing its value of equality on other cultures. The United Nations is becoming an agent of America and the West in imposing equality, unless equality in fact is a metaphysical truth. Yeah. Which is, of course, what the Bible is teaching. Thank you. These lively interactions with students, faculty, and community at the University of Minnesota have reinforced my faith that there is no reason for the West to amputate its own soul. A recovery of faith is possible and desirable. The sun need not set on the West.